The letter had come in February, when the cold in Moose Jaw was the kind that found the gaps in every wall, no matter how carefully you had chinked them. She had read it 3 times at the kitchen table of the boarding house, where she had been sleeping in a room with 2 other women for the past 4 months. And then she had folded it along its original creases and placed it in the pocket of her coat, where she would not have to decide anything about it immediately. The man who had written it had placed a notice in a paper that circulated through the Saskatchewan settlements. He was a widower with a grain operation north of Carlo Creek. He needed someone to manage the house. The wage was stated plainly. The room was stated plainly. He had written that he expected honest work and would provide honest payment, and that was the full extent of what he was offering. He had not described himself. He had not described the house. He had not made any assurances about his character, which she found, in a strange way, more reassuring than if he had. She had been managing other people's houses since she was 19. First her aunts, then a family in Regina, who had 3 children and a cook who drank, and then the boarding house itself when Mrs. Fenwick's hip had gone bad over the winter and someone had needed to take over the accounts. She knew how to run a household the way some people know how to read weather, not from study, from years of paying attention to what happened when you didn't. She wrote back. She told him what she could do and what she had done, and she said nothing about why she had left Regina, and he had not asked. His second letter had arrived 10 days later. It said, "If you are willing, the train from Moose Jaw reaches Carlo Creek on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I will meet it." She had been willing. That was the whole of it. The train came into Carlo Creek on a Thursday in the last week of March, when the snow was still on the ground but had gone gray and heavy with the approaching thaw. She was not the last off, but she was close to it. A family with children moved quickly through the door ahead of her, and a man in a good coat stepped down before she had gathered her bag from the rack above the seat. She took her time. It was a habit she had developed after a certain point in her life. The habit of letting a room empty before she entered it, of arriving at things slowly enough to see them before they saw her. The platform at Carlo Creek was short, unpainted wood, with a single bench against the station wall that had been repaired with a plank of different wood than the rest. The town beyond it was small, a grain elevator at the south end of the main street, a feed store, a hardware with its sign straight against the wall, a hotel that also served as the post office, 2 churches facing each other across a cross street, as if they were still deciding something. She stood at the end of the platform and looked at all of it. A man was standing by the station door, not leaning against it, standing, with his hat in his hands and his coat buttoned to the throat, and the expression of someone who had arrived early and was now managing the fact of having arrived early without wanting to show it. He was watching the passengers come off, and she understood from the way his eyes moved that he was not certain which one she was. She walked toward him. He saw her when she was about 10 feet away, and the uncertainty in his expression resolved itself into something more careful. "Miss Nora?" he said. "Yes," she said. He nodded, the way people nod when a thing they were not entirely sure of has turned out to be true. He reached for her bag. She let him take it. "Trucks on the east side," he said. "Roads have been soft, but we should make it before dark." That was all for the moment. She followed him around the side of the station, to where an old half-ton was parked on the gravel, dark green, with mud along the lower panels, to a height that told her something about the roads he had just mentioned. He set her bag in the bed and came around to open the passenger door and held it while she got in, and then closed it with the careful attention of a man who knows the door has a particular way it needs to be shut. She watched him walk around the front of the truck. He was older than she had pictured, or perhaps weathered was the better word, the kind of weathered that comes from decades of prairie winters rather than from age alone. He was not a tall man, but he was solid in the way that people become when physical work has been the structure of their days for a long time. His hands on the steering wheel were broad, and there was a scar along the left one that she noted without meaning to, and then noted that she had noted it. They drove east out of town, and then north on a road that was exactly as soft as he had described. The truck moved carefully over the ruts. He drove without hurrying, feeling the ground through the wheel, correcting without any drama when the rear end shifted. She watched the prairie come open around them as the town fell away. In March, it was not a beautiful landscape. It was vast and brown and patient, like something that had agreed a long time ago to wait. "How long since you've been up this way?" he asked. Not making conversation exactly, something more practical than that. "I haven't," she said. "I'm from the East originally. I came out to Regina 6 years ago." He absorbed that without comment. They went over a rise and the land opened up further, and she could see a line of bare willows following what must have been a creek to the north. "Carlo Creek," he said, as if he had seen her looking. "Runs high in spring, low enough to drive across by July. Does it flood?" "Not since '48. He paused. "That was before my time here. Aldrich Beaumont told me about it. He's had the quarter section to the south for 40 years. She stored that Aldrich Beaumont, South Quarter 40 years. She stored things that way without deciding to. It was another habit. The farmyard appeared over a long, gradual rise. A house, a barn, a machine shed with the door standing open, and behind the barn what looked like a granary that had been repaired more than once in the same place. The house was white, or had been white, and was now the color that white paint becomes when it has seen enough winters. Not dirty exactly, but tired. A spruce tree at the northwest corner of the yard, big enough to have been planted by someone long before him. A garden plot at the south side of the house, bare, now. The soil turned and left, waiting. He stopped the truck in front of the house and they sat for a moment. She did not know if he was deciding something or simply accustomed to a pause before the next thing. "I'll show you the house," he said. Inside, the kitchen was clean in the way that a man's kitchen is clean when he has applied deliberate and consistent effort to it. Nothing extra. The dishes were stacked with precision. The counter had been wiped recently enough that she could see the track of it. A cast iron pan hung on a hook by the stove, and a second one leaned against the wall below it. The table had 4 chairs. She counted them without meaning to, and then stopped herself from thinking about why. A set of curtains on the kitchen window, cotton, white with a small blue check, the kind of curtains that are sold in every dry goods store from here to Halifax, and that someone had put up carefully all the same. "The room's upstairs," he said. "Second door. The first one is mine. There's a bathroom at the end of the hall. I've been heating the water on the stove, but there's a tank that can be connected if you want to trouble with it." "I'll manage," she said. He nodded. He showed her the room. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the garden plot, and beyond it to the open field to the south, a hook on the back of the door. He left her there and went back downstairs, and she set her bag on the bed and stood at the window for a moment. The field to the south was still winter flat, nothing in it yet, but the turned soil in the garden below was darker than the field soil, worked and ready, and someone had made ridges in it already, running east to west, not random but planned. She looked at those ridges for a moment. He had done that recently, within the week probably, before the ground softened too much. She unpacked only what she needed for the night and went back down. He had put the kettle on. He was standing at the counter with his back to her when she came into the kitchen, and he said without turning, "There's soup from yesterday. It's not much, but there's enough." "That'll do," she said. She found the bowls herself by opening the right cupboard on the second try. She had learned over the years that the first thing you do in someone else's kitchen is learn where things are, and the best way to do that is simply to open cupboards without apology. He did not remark on it. She set the bowls on the table. He brought the pot. They sat across from each other and ate the soup, which was barley and something else, and it was better than not much. She was hungrier than she had realized, the way you sometimes didn't realize until the food was in front of you. "The garden's ready," she said. He looked up briefly. "I got to it last week. Ground was just opening." "What do you put in?" He listed it without ceremony. "Potatoes, carrots, turnips, onions, some beans along the south fence." She listened. He did not ask what she would add to this, and she did not say. That was a conversation for later, if there was a later, and the nature of their arrangement was such that later was not yet guaranteed. After supper, he brought in wood for the morning, and she washed the dishes, and they moved around the kitchen with the careful attention of 2 people who have not yet established where the edges of each other's space begin. Not awkward, exactly, just unresolved. She went up early. She read for a while from the book she had brought. And then she listened to the house settle around the cold, and she did not think about Regina. In the morning, he was already in the barn when she came downstairs. She stood at the kitchen window in the early light and watched the barn door, which was open, and the occasional movement she could see inside it. She made coffee the way she had learned to make it, which was strong enough to matter, and left a cup on the counter for when he came in. She found what was in the kitchen then, not enough, but the right kind. She had managed on less. She started a pot of porridge, and while it cooked, she looked at the curtains again. The blue check was faded more on the left side where the morning light hit it. Not ready to replace, but it had been thought about. You could tell when something had been thought about. He came in at 8:15 with the cold still on him, and stopped when he saw the porridge on the stove. He did not say anything for a moment. He went to the counter and found his coffee cup and stood there and drank from it, still with his coat on. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "The oats were going to go past," she said, which was not entirely true but was true enough. He sat down. She set a bowl in front of him and took one for herself. Outside, the light was going from white to yellow, a March morning light, thin but honest. A crow called from the spruce tree. "What needs doing first?" she said. He told her. It was a longer list than she had expected, but she had expected it would be, because a house with one person in it who works outside from first light builds up a backlog of the kind of work that does not get done when you are too tired, or there is no point doing it just for yourself. She listened to all of it, and she did not write it down. The weeks arranged themselves. She did not track them with much precision. The work made its own calendar. The storm in the second week that kept him in the machine shed for 2 days straightening the teeth on the harrow. The morning in early April when the creek ran over its bank by 3 feet and she could see it from the upstairs window, moving in a way that the creek should not move, fast and opaque and brown. He had been watching it from the yard when she came down, and he had said, without looking away from it, "It'll recede by evening," and it had. She learned the house the way she had learned every house she had worked in, by moving through it until she knew it the way she knew the back of her own hand. Which floorboard at the top of the stairs took weight without sound? Which burner on the stove ran hotter than the dial said? Which window stuck in wet weather, and which one had been painted shut at some point and should stay that way? She learned him the same way, by accumulation, without trying. He was in the barn by 6 most mornings. He came in at mid-morning and again at noon. He did not linger at the table. He did not make conversation for its own sake, but when he said something it was because there was a reason to say it, and he did not say more than that reason required. He drank 2 cups of coffee in the morning and nothing after supper except water. He read in the evenings, agricultural publications mostly, though she had seen a novel on the shelf in the front room that had been read more than once by the look of the spine. He did not ask about her history, and she did not offer it. There was a tin box on the shelf above the fireplace in the front room. She noticed it in the first week and did not look at it directly for some time. It was the kind of box a person keeps, not because they need what's inside immediately, but because they cannot put it any further away than this. She cleaned around it. She learned it by its position, by the fact that it was always in the same place, by the way the dust settled around it without settling on it, which meant it was touched regularly, even if she never saw him touch it. She did not ask about the box. In the 3rd week, a woman from the neighboring farm came to the door. Sylvie Cote, she introduced herself, from the quarter section to the east, married to Fernand, 2 children in school in town. She had a manner that was warm without being intrusive, which was a difficult balance, and Sylvie seemed not to know she was achieving it. She brought a jar of preserved Saskatoons and said she wanted to introduce herself now that the roads were passable. They had tea at the kitchen table. Sylvie talked about the spring seeding and about the school in Carlo Creek and about the United Church social that happened in May and whether she would be interested in coming along. She said this with a matter-of-fact friendliness, not as if she were making assumptions, just as if the option existed and she was putting it forward. When Sylvie had gone, she stood at the window and watched the truck go back east along the track and felt something she could not name exactly. Not loneliness, something more like the awareness of having been seen, the particular feeling of it, which was not always comfortable. He came in from the field in the late afternoon. He looked at the jar on the counter. "Sylvie Cote," she said. "Good neighbors," he said, and put his coat on the hook and went to wash up. That was all. She put the Saskatoons in the cupboard and started supper and did not think further about it. The trouble, if you could call it that, came on a Saturday in the last days of April. She had gone into Carlo Creek with the truck to get what was needed for the week. He had given her the list and the money and the keys without any fuss, and she had driven in on roads that were mostly dry now, the ruts from March already compressing back into something navigable. She had done the hardware first, then the grocery. Then she had stopped at the post office to pick up the mail. There were 3 envelopes, 2 for him which she did not look at. One addressed to her in handwriting she recognized before she turned it over to see the return address, at which point she had put all 3 envelopes in her coat pocket and gone back to the truck and sat there for a moment in the parking space outside the post office before she started the engine. She drove home. She unloaded the truck and put everything away and made lunch and set his on the counter under a cloth the way she did when he came in late. Then she went upstairs and sat on the bed with the envelope in her hand. The letter inside was from her sister in Ontario. It was not a cruel letter. Her sister was not a cruel person. It was a careful letter, the kind that is written by someone who has thought hard about what they want to say and has arrived at a version they believe is honest and kind, and which achieves both of those things individually without being able to prevent the damage they do together. Her brother-in-law had passed. Her sister was managing. She was not asking for anything, the letter said. She wanted her to know. She sat with the letter for a long time. She had not spoken to her sister in 14 months, which had not been her choice. The not speaking had been the result of a series of things that had happened before Regina, before the boarding house, in a period of her life she did not revisit. Her sister writing now meant something had shifted. She did not know yet what it meant for her. She came downstairs for supper and made it and they ate. He watched her across the table twice in a way she noticed, and then he looked at his plate and did not say anything. She did not say anything either. She ate everything on her plate because she had learned not to let the contents of the day change whether she ate, which was a habit that had cost her something to develop. After supper, she washed the dishes and he dried them, which was the arrangement that had evolved over the past weeks without being discussed. At some point, she set down the cloth she had been wiping the counter with and put both hands flat on the edge of the sink and looked at the window above it, which showed only the dark and her own pale reflection. He set the last dish on the shelf. He did not say anything immediately. She could feel him there the way you feel weather coming in from the north. "Bad news," he said. "Old news," she said. A pause. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind had picked up from the southwest, the spring wind, which was different from the winter wind in that it carried something with it instead of just taking. "All right," he said, which was not a question or a platitude, but simply an acknowledgement that she had said what she had said, and he had heard it and would not push further unless she wanted to go further, and he did not expect her to. She picked up the cloth and folded it over the tap. "My brother-in-law died," she said. "My sister wrote." He did not say he was sorry, which she had been braced for, which was the thing people said and which she generally found difficult to receive. He said, "Are you close with her?" "We were," she said. He nodded slowly. "That's a harder thing," he said, "than people think." She looked at him. He was looking at the shelf where the dishes were, with the particular expression of a person who has arrived at a conclusion through their own experience and knows it. He was not looking at her. She was glad of that. "Yes," she said. They said nothing else about it. She went to bed and lay awake for a time, and then she slept. In the morning, he was already out. She came downstairs to the usual quiet and made coffee and found, beside the coffee pot, a piece of paper on which he had written in his deliberate, slightly labored hand, "Carlo Creek, Post Office. Registered mail, 30 days, $2. And in case you want to write back." She read it twice. He had looked this up or asked someone, and he had done it this morning before she was awake, and he had not mentioned it, and he would not mention it. She set the paper on the windowsill where she would see it when she stood at the sink. She wrote to her sister the following week. May came, and then June, the way prairie spring accelerates once it decides to begin. The garden she had started properly in late April was growing now, the rows coming in cleaner than she had expected from soil that had been left alone for a season. She had added to his list a short row of dill along the east edge, some leaf lettuce that would bolt in July but was worth it for May and June, a few hills of winter squash that she had started from seed on the kitchen windowsill. She had not asked. She had simply done it, and when he came to the garden one evening and stood at the edge of it and looked at the rows, he said, "What's the squash?" "Hubbard," she said. "It stores well." He looked at the row for a moment. "Good," he said, and went back to the machine shed. She had taken over the mending by default, beginning with a pair of his work pants that had been sitting folded on the kitchen chair for 3 weeks, waiting for someone to repair the knee. She did it at the window in the morning, in the good light, because it was practical to use good light for close work. The first time she finished a piece and set it back on the chair, he had looked at it briefly and said, "I owe you for that." "Consider it part of the arrangement," she said. He had not argued, but the following week there had been a new spool of heavy thread on the sewing basket, the exact weight she used for the canvas work. He had not said anything about it, and she had not either. She noticed what he noticed. This was not something she had intended. It was a consequence of the close quarters of the arrangement, of two people moving through the same small set of rooms for weeks. She knew by the set of his shoulders when something had gone wrong in the field. She knew the difference between the sound of him coming in at the usual time and the sound of him coming in after something had held him up, which had a different quality, a kind of compressed efficiency, as if he were making up time just by the way he moved. She knew that he checked the barometer on the kitchen wall every morning when he came in for coffee, and that he tapped it with 2 fingers in the way that meant he did not entirely trust what it said. She knew that the tin box on the fireplace shelf was opened on Sunday evenings. She had not seen inside it. She had seen him sitting in the front room after supper on a Sunday with the box on the table beside him, not open when she passed the doorway, but settled there with the particular deliberateness of something taken out for a reason. She did not ask. She did not need to. Exactly. She had arrived at a certain understanding of it from the accumulation of small observations. The way he looked at the photograph on the bedroom dresser, visible through the open door when she passed in the mornings. The way he had referred to the curtains once as having been put up before he moved here, the cadence of that particular sentence. He had been alone here for some time. Not recently alone. Longer than that. July, and the days were long and hot. She had taken to sitting on the back steps in the late afternoon after the kitchen work was done, in the hour before she needed to start supper. The yard was quiet at that hour. The barn cats moved in and out of the shed. The grain was heading out in the fields to the east, and she had learned by now to read the color of it, the particular gold that meant it was coming on right. One afternoon she was sitting there when he came around from the machine shed carrying something, a belt he had been repairing, and he stopped when he saw her on the steps, not startled, just taking it in. He came and sat down on the step below her, which put his eye line at about the level of the yard, and he turned the belt over in his hands and looked at the splice he had made. They sat like that for a while without saying anything. A gopher called from somewhere near the fence line and was answered from somewhere further away. "The Cotes are having a gathering Saturday," he said. Sylvie mentioned it. She looked at the field. "She asked me to ask you," he added after a moment. She understood that this was not exactly a question. It was an offering of information that would become a question if she picked it up. "Are you going?" she said. "I was thinking on it." She looked at the barn cats. One of them had come to sit in the doorway and was watching the yard with the absolute unconcerned authority that cats manage. "I could make something to bring," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "She'd like that," he said. "She likes your bread." She had not known Sylvie had said that. Sylvie had come by twice more since April, and the bread had been there both times, but she had not known it had been remarked upon. She felt something move through her that she chose not to examine closely. "Saturday, then," she said. He nodded once and stood up and went back to the machine shed with the belt. And she sat on the steps a while longer in the afternoon heat and listened to the gophers and the faint sound of the tractor in the field to the north, which was not his field but old Aldrich Beaumont's, still farming at 73. and which she had come to find a reassuring sound, the industry of a man who simply continued. She found the thing on the last Tuesday of July, and she had not been looking for it. She had been rearranging the front room, something she had avoided until now because it was his space in a way the kitchen was not, and because rearranging a room requires a kind of confidence that takes time to earn. But the rug had been bothering her for weeks. Not dirty, just placed in a way that made the room feel slightly off balance, pulled too far north and leaving an awkward gap by the window. She had moved it while he was in the field, and then moved the chair to match, and then stepped back to look, and decided the bookshelf needed to come 3 inches east. She was checking the back of the shelf to make sure nothing had been left behind in the gap when she found it. Paper bag, folded down, sitting on the floor between the back of the shelf and the wall. Not hidden, just set there, out of the way. She would not have found it if she had not moved the shelf. She brought it out. The bag had a receipt stapled to it from the dry goods in Carlo Creek, dated the 4th of May. She had been here for 6 weeks by then. Inside the bag were seeds. Not his usual field order, she knew what that looked like. These were packet seeds, the kind sold in dry goods stores, the colorful kind with illustrations on the front. Delphiniums, lupines, 2 colors. Sweet William, hollyhocks. She knelt there with the bag open in her hands and looked at them. She had mentioned flowers once in passing in a conversation that had moved to other things immediately after. They had been walking back from Sylvie's truck after she dropped off a jar of preserves, and she had looked at the front of the farmhouse and said, more to herself than to him, that the south wall would take flowers well, something tall enough to break the line of white. He had not said anything. She had not pursued it. The conversation had moved on, and she had not thought of it again. The receipt was from the 4th of May. 3 days after she had said it. She knelt there for a moment with the bag of seeds in her hands. The house was quiet around her. From somewhere outside, she could hear the faint sound of the field work, steady and even, the sound she had come to know, as well as the sound of this house settling in the cold. He had bought them in May and not said anything. And then he had not planted them because it was not his place to plant them. They were not for him to plant. They were hers to plant or not plant. And so he had set them behind the shelf where they would wait until they were wanted or until they weren't. And in either case, he had said nothing about them. She set the bag on the arm of the chair. She looked at it. Then she got up and went to the kitchen and found the trowel on the back porch and the watering can by the garden. And she came around to the south side of the house and looked at the bed along the foundation, which was bare ground still. And she stood there a moment. It was late July. The lupines and the delphiniums would not do much this year. They would put down roots, and in the spring they would come back properly. The hollyhocks might manage a bloom before September if she got them in today. She got them in that afternoon. He came in for supper, and she heard him stop on the path behind her before he reached the back door. She did not turn around from the stove. He came in. He washed his hands at the sink. He said nothing about the seeds, and she said nothing about the seeds, and she knew without looking that he had seen them. They ate supper. The light came in long and warm through the kitchen window. A barn cat had come to sit on the back step, and its shadow stretched across the porch boards into the kitchen in a thin stripe. He pushed his plate back, the small and particular way he had. He said, "The step on the east side of the porch has been soft since spring." She looked up. "I meant to get to it," he said, "before it became a problem." He turned his cup in his hands. He was looking at the table. "I'll do it tomorrow if the rain holds off." She considered this for a moment. He was not talking about the step. "I noticed it," she said. "I've been going around the west side." He looked up then, briefly, and in the brief moment of it, she saw something she had not seen plainly before, not in all the weeks of watching, something careful and habitual, and also, below that, something that was not careful at all. Then he looked back at his cup. "I'll see to it tomorrow," he said. "All right," she said. Outside, the swallows were still flying, which meant the rain would hold at least until morning. The barn cats had disappeared. The field to the south was going from gold to amber in the last light, the whole weight of the summer in it. She picked up her cup. She did not look at the shelf, but somewhere between supper and the settling of the evening, she had stopped counting the weeks. Not as a decision, just as the natural consequence of having stopped waiting for some signal that this was temporary, and having found, without knowing exactly when, that she had simply begun.